In 2002, Boston was rocked by news of numerous Catholic priests who had committed acts of abuse against children, yet went unpunished by the law, instead being transferred by high-ranking leaders to other countries to continue their atrocities. Over time, it was discovered that similar incidents were not isolated to Boston or even the United States, but were occurring worldwide, spanning decades. How such a shocking matter could be concealed for so long was systematically covered up by society and facilitated by the authorities. In an environment deeply influenced by Catholicism like Boston, the truth was even more meticulously hidden. But with courageous hearts and meticulous investigation, the journalists of the Spotlight team at the Boston Globe exposed the hidden secrets, seeking justice for hundreds of victims who had been ignored for years. Their story inspired director Tom McCarthy and collaborator G.O.R. Singer to create Spotlight, the best newspaper film ever made since All the President's Men in 1976. So where does the root of the largest scandal in the history of the Roman Catholic Church lie? And what qualities does a journalist need to fulfill their duties? Let's explore this by analyzing the content of Spotlight. At the time depicted in the film, the case of child abuse by Father Joe Rogan had just been exposed. Initially, the Spotlight team intended to investigate whether the Archbishop of Boston was aware of the matter or turned a blind eye to it. However, a victim of abuse named Saviano told them that he knew of as many as 13 priests who had engaged in misconduct in Boston alone. Shortly after, the journalists spoke with Richard Side, a former priest who had treated abusive clergy, and were astonished when he estimated that there could be up to 90 priests who had abused children in Boston alone. These numbers continued to rise throughout the investigation, and by the end of the film, it was revealed that in Boston alone, there were 249 abusive priests. Boston was just one of 203 cities where major abuse cases had been uncovered. The question arose, why was this situation so severe? The root of the problem lies primarily in the requirement of celibacy for priests. In reality, only 50% of seminarians actually adhere to celibacy, creating a culture of secrecy within the clergy, covering up for each other, fostering and protecting reprehensible behavior. Among them was the Archbishop of Boston, who manipulated the law to shield individuals like Joe Rogan from accountability. They not only helped cover up the misconduct within the church, but also threatened and attacked anyone who spoke the truth, such as attempting to silence lawyer Mitchell Garabedian, who was the only attorney in Boston fighting for justice for the victims. In the past, a priest witnessed Joe Rogan's behavior and reported it to his superiors, but was threatened by the church to remain silent, lest he be transferred to the South. Richard Side publicly presented his research, and the church launched smear campaigns to discredit him. Even the abused victims were forced to sign confidentiality agreements if they wanted compensation, and it was revealed that the club was planning to delve deeper into Joe Rogan's case. The Archbishop himself openly threatened and had legal documents removed from court. However, the issue would not have escalated to such severity without the complicity of those in authority, including the police, lawyers, and court personnel. From the outset, the police assisted the church in driving away journalists, while a bishop advised the victims' families not to make a fuss. Lawyers representing the church, such as James Sullivan, intimidated witnesses like Wilson Rogers, and even representatives for the victims agreed to settlements without filing official records. In court, Judge Hong Dao Constant Spiney often showed favoritism toward the church, while court staff and other judges found ways to obstruct, denying journalists access to damning evidence against the Archbishop. There are three main reasons why those who knew of the cover-up assisted in concealing the evil. Firstly, the statutes of limitations made it difficult for victims to seek justice, as the legal time frame was only 3 years. Many victims were too ashamed to come forward until much later, and even when they did, according to the law, they could only receive a maximum compensation of $20,000. Some believed that reconciling victims privately with society was beneficial for them, but in reality, it only obscured abuse cases from the public eye. Secondly, the significant role of religion and social contributions to the community led many to sacrifice minority interests for the majority. They often argued that individuals like Joe Rogan were the exception, not representative of the entire system. As long as the majority benefited from the church, a few injured children were deemed acceptable casualties. Perhaps initially, the abusive priests were indeed few, but the complicity of those in authority turned them into a significant number. As we learn, the final reason many turned to aid the perpetrators was fear of the church's influence. When a journalist asked if the number of abusive priests in Boston could reach 90, lawyer Jim Sullivan advised his colleague to stop investigating immediately. In the past, there was a priest who witnessed Joe Rogan's behavior and reported it to his superiors, but was threatened by the church to remain silent, lest he be transferred to the South. Richard Side presented his research to the public, and the church launched various smear campaigns to discredit him. Even the abused victims were forced to sign confidentiality agreements if they wanted compensation. The club even planned to delve deeper into Joe Rogan's case. The archbishop himself threatened and openly allowed someone to remove legal documents from the court. However, the issue would not have escalated to such severity without the complicity of those in authority, including the police, lawyers, and court personnel. From the outset of the film, we see the police helping the church drive away journalists, while a bishop advised the victims' families not to make a fuss. Lawyers representing the church, like James Sullivan, intimidated witnesses like Wilson Rogers, and even representatives for the victims accepted settlements without filing official records. In court, Judge Hong Dao Constant Spiney often showed favoritism toward the church, while court staff and other judges found ways to obstruct, denying journalists access to damning evidence against the archbishop. There are three main reasons why those who knew about the cover-up assisted in concealing the evil. Firstly, the statutes of limitations made it difficult for victims to seek justice, as the legal time frame was only 3 years. But most victims were too ashamed to come forward until much later, and even when they did, according to the law, they could only receive a maximum compensation of $20,000. Some believed that privately reconciling victims with society was beneficial for them, but in reality, it only obscured abuse cases from the public eye. Secondly, the significant role of religion and social contributions to the community led many to sacrifice minority interests for the majority. They often argued that individuals like Joe Rogan were the exception, not representative of the entire system. As long as the majority benefited from the church, a few injured children were deemed acceptable casualties. Perhaps initially, the abusive priests were indeed few, but the complicity of those in authority turned them into a significant number. As we learn, the final reason many turned to aid the perpetrators was fear of the church's influence. When a journalist asked if the number of abusive priests in Boston could reach 90, lawyer Jim Sullivan advised his colleague to stop investigating immediately. Eric also dodged questions from the Spotlight team about settlements because merely confirming their existence could jeopardize his professional status. Even a priest who wanted to testify to atone was forced to recant under pressure. And perhaps surprisingly, the archbishop himself had fundraised for a report warning about corrupt clergy. However, he withdrew support and shelved the report. The consequence of all the indifference and complicity mentioned above is a systemic cover-up, where top leadership in society cares only about appearances, disregarding the harm suffered by victims. The perpetrators continue to reoffend because they know they won't face consequences. The victims are robbed of their faith, trust, and justice, leading them to turn to alcohol or drugs. And when neither works, they choose a bridge to jump off. Those fighting for justice are either smeared or give up due to frustration. However, it should be understood that while the film portrays the unsavory aspects of Catholic society, it does not condemn their faith. This is exemplified by Richard's heartfelt confession that, "I haven't been to church in a long time, but I still consider myself a Catholic because the church is just a human institution. It will pass, but my faith is eternal." Understanding this reveals that those covering up crimes do so not out of religious devotion, but out of their own pride. A phrase mentioned frequently in the film is outsiders, used by James Sullivan and Catholic Charities representative Pete Conley to refer to Marty Barron, who is not born and raised in or familiar with Boston. To them, the new editor of the Boston Globe surely doesn't care about the city like a native. When the Archbishop talks about his time at the newspaper, he says, "Our readers aren't happy. They see us as outsiders poking around." Clearly, this is a warning to Marty that newcomers should mind their own business. Lawyer Michel Garabedian also calls himself an outsider because there aren't many Armenians in Boston. His colleagues think poorly of him and don't believe he truly has evidence against them. The bias against outsiders has deeply ingrained into the psyche of many, leading to the belief that outsiders shouldn't meddle in internal affairs. However, ironically, these outsiders are the ones who fight tirelessly for critical issues that insiders either don't recognize or don't want to acknowledge. Without Garabedian bringing the case to court, Morty would have been unaware of the cover-up, and without Morty's push, the club would have dismissed the story early on because they deemed accusations against the church as trivial. As Garabedian pointed out, some matters require an outsider's perspective to see that the abuse continues due to various parties condoning it for collective interests. They accept such sacrifices because they themselves are not victims, but who can guarantee that the next victim won't be themselves or their children? The editors of the Spotlight team discovered that one of the corrupt priests was the coach of their middle school's wrestling team, and a former altar boy he knew was a victim. The reporters even recognized a perpetrator living nearby. The danger was glaring, yet Spotlight faced resistance from all sides, including acquaintances and even superiors. They also had to consider readership, with 53% of the newspaper's readers being Catholics. However, to pursue the truth, the team chose to defy public opinion in this case. Here, the film imparted a valuable lesson to those in the journalism field, that for a newspaper to fulfill its functions, it needs to operate independently. In other words, journalists must learn to position themselves as outsiders to maintain objectivity when necessary, unaffected by vested interests or societal pressures. Sometimes, outsiders like these break through impasses and bring about change for insiders. For example, lawyers like Marl or Sullivan clearly had a conscience, but chose to help the church settle with victims because they felt the situation was hopeless. Once they saw an opportunity to expose the crimes, they were willing to risk their careers to provide information about the offenders. Or Judge Spiney, though devout, still ruled justly in the lawsuit against the church, aiming to make classified documents public, not just for journalists, but for anyone fighting for justice. You, as an outsider, don't have to stand idly by. While some involved parties may try to stop you for fear of disrupting their interests, others need your help to reclaim justice. And sometimes, your intervention is the key to unlocking the deadlock. One of the things this film excels at is showcasing the process of creating outstanding journalism. Firstly, reporters must select a story worth pursuing. Amid countless leads, they must sift through vast amounts of information to find the necessary data, aiming to grasp the essence of the issue. Additionally, the team must build trust with interview subjects, knowing that much of what they share comes with sacrifices. Throughout this process, journalists must withstand immense pressure from various stakeholders. Ultimately, we witness the team's dilemma when choosing between telling the story immediately to avert immediate danger or waiting to fully uncover the root cause of the problem. Despite having to juggle numerous tasks within limited time frames and facing external pressures, they must remain meticulous and thorough, as a careless mistake could have unforeseen consequences. For instance, Ravi overlooked a list of 20 corrupt priests sent to the newsroom years ago because he didn't consider the matter significant enough. As he delved deeper into the investigation, he regretted this decision. Similarly, someone at the club dismissed crucial information provided by Phil Saviano, doubting the credibility of someone as seemingly radical as him, only to realize later the validity of Saviano's claims. If this information had been received earlier and handled more carefully, many lives might have been saved. However, before the truth becomes evident, few recognize what's worth delving into. The only way to avoid mistakes is to meticulously scrutinize each piece of information received, rather than dismissing it because it seems unpersuasive or too cumbersome to pursue. Despite encountering regrettable errors, the Spotlight team ultimately reached their goal. It was all thanks to their perseverance and sacrifices, not just theirs, but also those who shared their stories and experiences with them. Crimes were exposed, truths were brought to light, and those who needed to know were informed, providing them with encouragement. In conclusion, borrowing Morty's words, sometimes we grope in the darkness for so long that we easily forget, then suddenly a ray of light shines through. Everyone bears responsibility in this endeavor, but everyone has produced excellent journalism here, an article that I believe will immediately have a powerful impact on our readers. For me, this type of story is the reason we do journalism.